we have a culture that reflects the lowest. So what people consider to be culture is usually like very low street level. It's not the culture that reflects the highest, the high level educated. Even we have a culture that looks at wealth as negative. So if you get rich in Black America, you're automatically seen in a light as evil, even though everybody's trying to get rich. It's an oxymoron. So what end up happening is when people do get things, they detach themselves from it because it stops making sense and it's not conducive to more growth and it's not healthy. Because you're trying to figure out how to operate in a culture that's oxymoronic, that's not operating off logic. So when we consider something to be culture, it's not because it's reflective of high level intelligence and we say, oh, he must be from the culture, bro, smart as hell. That's not what we do. We look, even the way that we think about language. If, you speak a vernacular that comes from lower class or poverty environments, which was always influenced by, white poverty, then they say, oh, you from the culture. But if you speak of high intelligence and the subject matter in which you speak about is high intelligence, it's not recognizable as what is a reflection of culture. So when we have Black History Month, we start talking about all these Black inventors and scientists that have done something, but that's not a reflection of culture, even though that's the history of culture in America. Got to think of it. We have low culture, we have high culture, we have anti-culture, we have pro-culture. Most of what we celebrate is anti-culture. No values. So in entertainment and education and music, today in liberation movements, it's not about having values, it's about having no values. It's about not being judged, not being shamed for anything that you do. No values. It's about independence. That means no family. Most of the time, because it's not an interdependent webbing and system. It's not a community. It's not a collective. So we look at independence as strength, anti-culture. you understand these things? Hip-hop foundation of teaching and being revolutionary and being aspirational, that's culture. Hip-hop reflecting crime and misery and poverty and things of that nature consistently, and the degradation and murder of each other, that's anti-culture. Culture has to be built on rules. Culture has to be built on something so that you can maintain it. But if you say that we want to maintain the lack of family, the lack of values, we want to maintain murder and things of that nature happening, that's not culture. Because that's not something you can build upon. It's something that takes away. So it has to be constructive. Easiest ways to recognize this, go look at all the cultures around the world. Go look at what makes their culture. And then think about how would you create something that would be anti that culture? How would you put the music there? Somebody say, bring back the shame. Shame is not a bad thing. You're not supposed to live in it. See, let me give you a lesson on this. Shame is a feeling that happens to us when we start to resent ourselves for things that we've done or participated or a part of. We feel ashamed. That's a self-regulating system of consciousness within self, so that we don't do that thing again, so that we coincide that action with a negative feeling, right? Shame is not something you're supposed to stay. It's a feeling that you go through, which usually turns into a guilt. Guilt is when we feel bad for something, right? Shame is when we feel we are bad. So when a person feels like they are bad and they're no good, that's not good to stay there. But that feeling arises when we do something that points to us being a bad person. And then we reflect and think, I'm not a bad person. I just did something bad. Then they feel guilty. And then past guilt, you go to redemption to get out of that. And culture has to have a process of redemption. And that process of redemption means that you can do something bad, but there's something that you can do. There's a process that you can go through in order to be redeemed, to be a part of society once again, or culture once again. But if there's no process for redemption, then there is no point of having the guilt. There's no point of pointing out, like, who cares about being counseled if they can't be redeemed? So there has to be a redemption process, but we don't have that because everybody wants to get rid of institutional order. Everybody wants to get rid of all religious orders, everything, which those things usually come with process, whether you like them or not. So you have to think about if any point in time in your life that you've done something, and imagine if you were never forgiven and you never got redemption. Imagine if your family you did one thing and your family never forgives you. You would hate that family. Forget them. Then it would be no reason to speak a truth. It would be no reason to apologize. It would be no reason to make amends. So cancellation without a process of redemption is not a culture or a society you should ever want to be a part of. Any organization that has that, any family structure that has that, yeah. Maybe there may be a time where you get shunned and you got to go in a disciplinary timeout, or people may not talk to you, or you have to go do 1,000 good deeds to come back, or you have to expose yourself and then be honored. Like, there has to be a process. That's just simple mathematics. But that's when we start talking about real culture. You know what I'm saying? These folks that you may not like them, but when I travel the world and I observe people's cultures, and I can see why they're able to maintain power and control for so long. I went to the UK, and when I was in the UK, they had a ritual, because all cultures have to have rites of passage, rituals of passage. Right? Rituals are a normal part of any society and or culture. Right? We have some rites of passage and rituals, but they're diminishing. Right? We may do libation, pour out liquor for the dead, but we don't truly honor thy ancestor. So we have one aspect of it, but the rest is lost. And that nuance is lost without any real meaning and any real culture behind it. Right? It's a part of the mourning process. Right? But when you go to places like when I was in the UK, one thing that I seen them do, and this was at the House of Commons, right? And this was and this is basically like, you know, their Congress or whatever. I forget what the Parliament building. So when the Queen comes into the chambers where they have session, she has to walk through this particular line. And this has been happening for hundreds of years, right? And above, you look above, you're not supposed to take no pictures or nothing of that nature. And you look above and it's these 4 saints, right? And it represents these 4 different corners. And they're looking down, right? And as the Queen has to walk through and she has to cross over, right, past these 4 saints into the chambers. And it's a certain way she has to walk, a certain way they have to do everything. And it's been maintained for hundreds of years. Right? And then before you even get in there, there's this room there's a holding room. And in this holding room, you have all of these pictures of all of the people that they've conquered through conquest over the years. Right? So they show them beating up all kind of different people. Then before that, there's this Viking ship that is in this other part of the building. This is Viking ship that is basically the rooftop of this building. And they got some of the enemy heads in the spike. Now, they have no fear of showing their history and their culture. It doesn't all have to be good. Doesn't all have to be bad for them. It is what it is, and they respect and they honor and they venerate their ancestors, mostly by doing the same thing in a modern form. But when you have something that you've been doing for so long, over and over and over and over and over and over, right? You dominate the paradigm and you force everybody else's lives to be structured around your processes and your structures. Because you can create a system that can be passed down, right, throughout eternity. So as long as people are following the same rituals over and over and over and over again, then the institution remains. The culture remains. But when you break that apart and you allow people to be like, oh, that's old. Why are we still doing this? Why do we do that? The system fails. The institution fails, right? And there's nothing to pass down, and you can easily be wiped out and taken over. So when I go around and I see these people who have these rituals and these processes that they've been doing for thousands of years, then I can understand why they still have power, because the institution that powers it, which is his rights, his rituals, his values, is still in practice to this day. Still in practice to this day, right? So the thing of it is now, all right, what do we have as rites of passage? What do we have as codes of conduct that lets you know somebody is a part of your tribe and a part of the system that you want to maintain? There are written traditions, oral traditions that pass down systems, right? And then you have to understand that, there's 40-something million black people in America. We're not all of the same tribe. Some of us are meant to be the scientists, the builders. Some people are meant to be the workers. Some people are meant to be the scribers that record history. Some people are meant to be the educators that teach history, right? Some people are meant to be the warriors that fight along the right side of history to maintain and preserve, right? There are all of us supposed to have our different parts that we play and the roles that we play in this thing that we have. And so the goal is to get back to that and say, okay, what part do I want to play that would allow us to have an institution and an organization? Some of us play that role. And the problem is that there's two parts. There's sometimes way too many chiefs. And another time, there would have been a way where we had to go about figuring out who should really be the chief. But we don't have a ritual. We don't have a process for that. All we have is ego for that today. So when there is no organization and no institution for who gets to be the next chief, then everybody feels like they can be. So if everybody feels like, oh, I could be the next prophet because you got a platform. No, there has to be a ritual and a process for everything. And that here's the caveat. Here's the whole thing is that you can create that amongst your people, or you can be a part of something that you believe in. And you can play a role that assists on allowing that to thrive. But most of us are lone Indians. Most of us are lone wolves. What are you a part of is the question. What is your family a part of? What movement? What prophecy are you all working to operate into existence? What prophecy do your family believe in? None? Some? And if they do believe in it, then how are they playing a role operationally to help that come true?